I was born in 1952 in a mining town called Harmony, nestled between hills and rust-colored dirt roads in Missouri. The kind of town where everyone knew your grandfather's name and the price of eggs was discussed more passionately than politics. Our house sat near the edge of town, its porch sagging a little on one side, with flower pots my mother refused to let die and a tin mailbox that rattled in the wind. Life was simple, not easy, but simple. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, you could hear the distant hum of coal trucks climbing the ridge at dawn, like some kind of metal heartbeat that set the rhythm for our days. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. My father, Hank Bennett, was a coal miner. Every evening, he'd come home covered in black dust, looking like a ghost that had been dragged through the earth and sent back again. He'd wash up in the mudroom, call for supper, and hum a tune, usually Elvis or Patsy Cline, while Mama stirred something in a pot. My mother, Martha, was all softness and starch. She made the best sourdough in 5 counties and never let me leave the house without brushing my hair at least twice. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but our home smelled of fresh bread, coffee, and lavender from the drawer sachets Mama tucked into every corner. My childhood memories are steeped in golden afternoon light, the radio crackling old tunes, and the tap-tap of Mama's broom across the kitchen floor. We had 2 bedrooms, one for my parents and one I shared with my 2 younger sisters. We took turns sleeping near the window, especially in the summer when the breeze carried in the scent of honeysuckle and grilled corn from the neighbors' yards. Daddy wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it settled in you like gospel. "Never marry a man who doesn't look at you the way I look at your mother," he once said, his voice raspy from decades underground. I carried that with me like scripture, not realizing how easily dreams can dress themselves in costumes, how love can be rehearsed and performed by those who've learned to mimic its script. I met Charles Whitman in the spring of 1970. I was 18, teaching Sunday school at Harmony Baptist, and he was visiting his aunt, who'd fallen sick and needed care. Charles showed up at service in a neatly pressed shirt, hair slicked back, smelling like bay rum and confidence. He held the hymnal for his aunt with such reverence that I thought, that's the kind of man who would never raise his voice. He had a smile that leaned just shy of charming and a voice as smooth as the creek that ran behind our school. After service, he waited for me by the white picket fence, tipped his hat, and said, "Miss Bennett, your lesson on Ruth was the finest I've ever heard." No boy had ever called me Miss before, and certainly not with that mix of playfulness and respect. I blushed so hard I nearly dropped my Bible. Mama liked him right away. Polite, clean shoes, sturdy handshake, and Lord, he even helped me with the dishes, she told my father after his second visit. Daddy, however, was less taken. He never said much against Charles, but one night, while sanding his old fishing rod on the porch, he looked at me and said, "There's something about him that doesn't settle." I brushed it off. Daddy was protective, that was all. I told myself Charles was different, just more polished than the farm boys I'd grown up with. We courted the old-fashioned way, letters left on my doorstep, walks around the lake with a chaperone, usually my curious younger sister trailing 10 paces behind. Charles knew how to say just enough, just the right flowers, just the right compliments. "You have the eyes of someone who understands the world," he once told me. I didn't know what that meant, but I liked the way it sounded. By the fall, he was spending every Sunday at our house, chatting with Daddy about the Cardinals' season and helping Mama harvest tomatoes from the garden. He even brought my sisters little peppermint sticks. That Christmas, he gave me a book of poetry with my name embossed on the cover in gold letters. I remember thinking, this must be love, real love, like the kind Mama and Daddy have. He proposed on New Year's Eve, under the sycamore tree near my childhood home. It wasn't extravagant. No photographer, no audience, just a quiet moment, a ring in a velvet box, and a promise wrapped in the scent of winter air. "I want to build a life with you, Eleanor. One where you'll never have to lift a finger or doubt how much you're loved." I said yes before he could finish the sentence. At 20 years old, I believed that love, true love, sounded exactly like that. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't love I said yes to. It was the dream. The fantasy that if I chose right, if I followed the rules and picked the man who made all the right gestures, I'd be protected from pain. But lies don't always come loud. Sometimes they come dressed as promises, as tenderness, as a man with clean shoes who helps with the dishes. I didn't know it yet, but that proposal would be the first step into a life I'd have to rebuild from scratch. A life that would one day shatter, not with a bang, but with 1,000 silent cracks, until all that remained was a woman staring out a kitchen window, wondering how the fairy tale turned into a cage. We were married on a chilly January afternoon in 1972 in the same Baptist church where I'd sung Silent Night as a little girl and where Mama had once walked down the aisle 25 years before me. My wedding dress was hand-sewn by my mother and 2 of her sisters, stitched over months with nervous excitement and whispered prayers that this union would be everything I dreamed. The lace was borrowed. The veil, pressed and folded, had belonged to my grandmother. When Daddy walked me down the aisle, his hand trembled just enough for me to notice, but his jaw stayed firm. "I'm giving you away now, Elle," he whispered, "but you always have a way back if you ever need it." I smiled. I didn't think I'd need it. Charles was waiting for me at the altar in a suit that fit like it had been made for him. His smile wide, his posture proud. From the outside, we were picture perfect, the kind of couple you'd find on the front of a church bulletin. Our honeymoon was in the Smoky Mountains, a week-long getaway in a pine cabin Charles had saved months for. The first 2 days were soft firewood crackling, quiet walks under frost-bitten branches, breakfasts in bed with buttered toast and black coffee. I was inexperienced, nervous, but he was patient, at first. On the 3rd night, something shifted. His touch became less tender, his voice more insistent. "A wife satisfies her husband," he muttered when I pulled away. "That's part of the deal, Eleanor." I didn't cry, not out loud. I just stared at the wooden beams above our bed and waited for it to be over. When it was, I curled away from him. He called me sensitive and kissed my shoulder like an apology. I said nothing. I still believed we just needed time, that this was what married life looked like. Compromise, adjustment, learning curves. When we returned to Harmony, we settled into a rented house near the edge of town, not far from my old elementary school. Charles continued working as a traveling salesman for a furniture company, often gone for 2 or 3 days at a time. I took a part-time teaching job at the local Sunday school and began to build our home the way Mama taught me, warm, welcoming, filled with fresh bread and clean sheets. But slowly, the warmth inside the house started to feel like something else, a low, constant burn I couldn't name. It began with the lipstick. "Why do you wear that shade to church?" he asked one Sunday. "You trying to impress someone?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. "Then it was my skirt too short," he said, "for a married woman, the blouse too fitted, the way I smiled at the grocery clerk too friendly, the way I waved at old classmates in the diner too familiar." One afternoon, I came home from picking up groceries to find my old high school yearbook in the trash. "Don't need reminders of other men in this house," he said. I told myself it was protectiveness, passion even. That jealousy was proof of love. It wasn't until much later that I learned it was simply control dressed in affection. In the spring of 1973, I discovered I was pregnant. I held the test strip in my hand and cried not out of fear, but joy. A child, a chance to start fresh. I imagined the way my father had looked at me growing up and thought, "I'll give this baby the same." When I told Charles, he picked me up and spun me around. "You'll be the best mother," he said. "I'll be the kind of father mine never was." For a few weeks, it felt like the old Charles returned all tenderness and touch. But at 11 weeks, I woke one night to a pain that split me open. I bled through the sheets before I could make it to the bathroom. The hospital kept me overnight. They said there was nothing I did wrong. "These things happen," the nurse said softly, placing her hand on my arm. But Charles didn't believe it. "You must have lifted something. You probably walked too much." "You should have rested more." I nodded silently, though I knew better. I let the guilt settle where the grief already lived. That was the first time I cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear me. 2 months later, the criticisms returned, louder now, sharper. One night, he came home from a trip, sniffed the kitchen, and asked, "This is dinner you had all day?" It didn't matter that I had cleaned the house, done laundry, baked bread, and prepared his favorite stew. The next morning, he slammed a door so hard it cracked the frame. "I work hard, Eleanor. I deserve better than this." When I became pregnant again in early 1974, I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I was terrified to hope. I followed every rule. No lifting, no caffeine, plenty of rest. The baby made it to 5 months. I had started knitting little socks. I had picked out names. I had felt the flutter, that delicate, butterfly-like movement that makes it real. Then came the ache, then the silence on the monitor. And this time, I wasn't even allowed to grieve. Charles threw a glass across the room that shattered against the wall. "What is wrong with you?" he yelled. "My mother had 7 kids without a problem. You can't carry one." I stood still, arms around my belly as if I could still protect what was already gone. That night, I finally spoke up. Maybe it's not my body. Maybe it's the stress, the shouting, the way you look at me like I'm a burden. His hand was faster than my thought. The slap came like lightning, sharp, sudden, and so shocking I barely registered the sound until I tasted blood. I stumbled backward into the wall, one hand catching a framed picture of our wedding day before it crashed to the floor. He stood over me, breathing hard. "Don't you ever talk to me like that again. I'm your husband. You owe me respect." He went to bed. I stayed on the floor. My cheek throbbed. My hand shook as I cleaned up the glass. I looked at our faces in that shattered frame, 2 young people, smiling wide under a veil, and wondered how love could disappear so quickly, so completely, like smoke vanishing in open air. But I didn't leave. I told myself it was a moment, a mistake, an anger he'd never repeat. But the lie was already rooted deep, the one that said good women stay, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. And I was still too young, too scared, too ashamed to know that what I had mistaken for love was the beginning of something else entirely. By the spring of 1975, I had stopped recognizing my own reflection. There was a time I could look in the mirror and see the girl Mama raised a school teacher with gentle eyes and steady hands. But now, I saw a woman with hollow cheeks, a perpetual bruise hidden under powder, lips that smiled only when someone else was watching. Charles had become a master at the game of appearances. In public, he was still the doting husband offering his arm, opening doors, cracking jokes at family dinners. At home, he was a storm with no warning, a man who needed no reason to rage. And the neighbors, they looked away. People in Harmony had a habit of hearing but not listening, seeing but not acknowledging. I'd walk down the porch steps with sunglasses on cloudy days, and no one ever asked why. If the garden lay untended or the laundry stayed out in the rain, someone might cluck their tongue, but no one knocked on the door. The town that once felt like home now felt like a silent jury. The only person who seemed to notice was Marilyn Cooper, our next-door neighbor. Marilyn was 5 years older than me, freshly divorced, with platinum blonde hair that never frizzed and a habit of watering her flowers in silk house robes. She brought over lemon bars once a week, lingered at the fence just long enough to hear how I was doing, and never judged me for the bags under my eyes. "He hits you, doesn't he?" she whispered one afternoon as we deadheaded marigolds. I flinched. "No, I'm clumsy sometimes." She looked at me with eyes too knowing. "You're not the first, and you don't have to stay, honey." I wanted to believe her, that I could leave, that someone would believe me if I said the truth out loud. But I had no savings, no job since Charles insisted I quit teaching, no child, and still some twisted part of me wanted to believe he could go back to being the man who once read poetry to me under the sycamore tree. Until the afternoon I came home early from the school library. A busted water heater had canceled the volunteer reading hour, and I returned to a house filled with laughter, a woman's laugh, high-pitched and familiar, coming from the bedroom. The world around me slowed. I remember the quietest creak of the door as I pushed it open. And there they were. Charles, Marilyn. In our bed. In the same sheets where I once clutched my stomach and wept for a baby that never made it. In the room where I had begged him not to yell, not to grab. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I closed the door and walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table and stared at my trembling hands. 30 minutes later, I heard the back door click shut, Marilyn slipping out like a shadow. Charles appeared in the doorway, whistling like nothing had happened. Then he saw me. "What are you doing home?" he asked, voice already changing. "They let us out early. The boiler broke." We locked eyes. I saw the exact moment he realized I had seen. "Did you see something?" he said low, warning lacing each syllable. "I saw everything," I replied, my voice flat. He laughed. Actually laughed. "And what are you gonna do, Eleanor? Huh? Tell the preacher? Tell your daddy? Who's going to believe the crazy little wife who can't even carry a child?" I stood up. My knees shook, but I found my voice. "I'm leaving." That's when the smile disappeared. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "You leave when I say you leave. You're my wife." "I'm not a thing you own," I whispered. He blocked the doorway. I tried to go around him. He shoved me back, and then the storm hit. His fist found my stomach. I doubled over, gasping. A slap sent me into the kitchen chair, which tipped backward. My head cracked against the floor. Then came the kicks. To the ribs. To the back. My body folded like paper, each blow an exclamation point on every hateful word he'd ever spoken. "You're nothing," he spat. "You think you can leave me? You think anyone else would want you?" I don't remember much after that. Just colors and pain. My vision pulsed red and black. I smelled iron and floor wax. Somewhere between consciousness and silence, I heard him storm out, keys jangling. "Fix your face before I get back," he shouted. And then the door slammed. I lay there, broken, bleeding, unable to move. But something in me, some ember not yet smothered, whispered, "Get up." I crawled across the floor, one hand dragging behind me. Every breath felt like glass. I reached the phone and dialed the only person I still trusted, my sister, Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Claire, help. Charles." The rest was swallowed by sobs. "I'm coming," she said, voice steady. "Don't move." 15 minutes later, Claire and her husband, Walter, burst through the door. She let out a sharp gasp when she saw me, collapsed in a puddle of my own blood. Walter picked me up as if I were made of feathers. "We're going to the hospital." "No," I whimpered. "He'll find me there." "To our place, then," Claire said, already gathering clothes. She stepped into the bedroom and came out pale. "Eleanor, there's blood on the bed. A lot, but it's not yours." I blinked. The room swayed. A deep, dark chill settled in my chest. They took me to their house, bathed me, bandaged me, fed me soup I couldn't hold down. That night, Claire sat on the edge of the couch and asked, "How long?" I told her everything. The miscarriages, the bruises, the silence. "And Marilyn?" she asked. I nodded. She was supposed to be my friend. Claire gritted her teeth. "You're never going back." "I know," I whispered. But even as I said it, something gnawed at me. Not just fear, something darker, because in that bedroom, in the smear of blood, I hadn't shed a new kind of truth had taken root. A truth no longer about survival, but about what exactly Charles had done when he left me there on that floor. A month after Claire pulled me off that blood-stained floor, the world outside moved on like nothing had happened. But inside me, time had stopped. I stayed in the spare bedroom of Claire's house, tucked under a floral quilt, surrounded by walls that didn't know my pain. My ribs ached with every breath, my eye still carried the ghost of Charles's last punch, and my body, thin, tired, and stitched with bruises, moved as if it were no longer mine. I didn't leave the house, not even to sit on the porch. Harmony had always been a small town, but now it felt like a microscope. Gossip bloomed like wildflowers. Did you hear Eleanor ran off? They say she seduced that Cooper woman's husband. No wonder Charles left. Even the grocery clerk stopped making eye contact when Claire picked up milk in my name. Then came the silence. From Charles. From Marilyn. Nothing. Not a single phone call. No knock on the door. No apology. No plea. Not even anger. Just absence. He had vanished. And he had taken her with him. The police stopped by twice, once to ask about Charles's behavior and another time with a photo of Marilyn. Did you know she'd been missing for over a week? The officer asked, jotting something in a worn notebook. I nodded, still unable to say the word yes, without my throat burning. Claire hovered at the door, arms folded. She was sleeping with Eleanor's husband, she said flatly. You should be talking to him, not her. They did try to talk to him, but he was gone. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in April, the news broke. They had found a body. Buried shallow in the north field just outside town, a piece of land developers had been scouting for a new gas station. A construction worker had caught the glint of something shiny sticking out of the soil. It was a bracelet, silver, etched with the name Marilyn. They dug further, found her body, wrapped in plastic. Crude cement poured over her chest, like someone had tried to weigh her down with guilt and failed. Charles's fingerprints were on the shovel, on the plastic. On the motel receipt they found in his glove compartment, the police issued a warrant. He was spotted 2 days later, heading west on Highway 60 in a stolen pickup. A high-speed chase ensued. It ended in a hail of sirens, dust, and gunfire. He refused to stop, drove through a police barricade. An officer fired. Charles was hit in the chest, died before the ambulance arrived. Just like that, it was over. But it wasn't, really, not for me. The town mourned Marilyn, the beautiful, misunderstood neighbor. Her sister lit candles on her porch. The church hosted a memorial. No one mentioned what she did to me. No one cared. And Charles, he became a headline. Local salesman killed after murdering mistress. I was mentioned once in the 5th paragraph as the estranged wife, as if I had evaporated the moment he turned violent. But the pain didn't evaporate, it hardened. I returned to my old house briefly, not to stay, just to collect what I could. The front steps creaked the same way. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon, but the walls seemed smaller now, as if ashamed of what they'd witnessed. I found a drawer full of letters I had written to myself and never sent, notes of longing, apologies I'd rehearsed, confessions I'd swallowed. I left most of them behind. The town saw me differently now, not as Eleanor Bennett, daughter of Hank and Martha, Sunday school teacher, choir singer. No, now I was the widow of a killer, a woman who either didn't know or didn't care, either blind or complicit. The kind of woman people avoided in church pews and whispered about in grocery aisles. I applied for my teaching job again. The school board said they'd filled the position. Perhaps in the fall, the superintendent mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I could see the judgment sitting like dust on his shoulders, as if I had somehow stained the hallways just by surviving. At night, I'd sit by the window in Claire's guest room, wrapped in a sweater too big for me, and reread the article about Charles's death. There was a photo of him, the one from our wedding, cropped and grainy. The smile that once melted my knees now looked like a mask I should have recognized. And then there was Marilyn, a small portrait lifted from her church directory. Her hair was curled, her eyes bright. No one saw the woman who grinned as she told me she understood. Looking at their pictures, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I felt hollow, like I had been emptied out and packed with something heavier than grief, something cold and sharp, like shame wearing the skin of survival. But the worst came when I saw my own name, printed between theirs. The affair had created tensions in the Whitman household. The article read, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman was unavailable for comment. No one asked what I saw, what I endured. No one asked about the bruises or the babies or the long nights waiting for him to come home. I wasn't even worth a quote. That night, I tore the newspaper in half. then into quarters, then into shreds so fine they slipped through my fingers like ash. I opened the window and let the wind take them. I thought of my father's words the night before my wedding. You always have a way back if you ever need it. But what he hadn't told me was what to do when there was no way back. When the person you were had been buried alongside the version of your husband you thought you knew. When ghosts didn't just haunt the house, they lived inside you. And in that moment, with nothing but the cold Missouri wind against my face and silence humming in my ears, I finally understood. My silence had killed 2 people, and a part of me, the softest part, had died with them. In late July of 1975, Daddy packed up everything we hadn't already lost and drove us east. He hadn't said much after the funeral, or after the reporters left our doorstep, or even after Charles's face appeared one last time in the Sunday Gazette. But one morning, he stood in the kitchen with his flannel shirt half-buttoned, stared at his coffee, and said, "Harmony's too small for healing, Elle. We're going to Cincinnati." And that was that. He sold the house quietly, loaded up our old Ford with more silence than suitcases, and drove us across state lines. We arrived in a city buzzing with streetcars and strangers, and suddenly I was just another woman on the sidewalk. No one looked twice, no one whispered my name. It felt, for the first time in years, like a kind of mercy. Daddy rented a 2-bedroom above a bakery on Gilbert Avenue, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon by day and yeast by night. I got the smaller room with a window that faced the Ohio River. From there, I could see the steel bridge stretch like a promise across the water, and on quiet evenings, the sun would settle gently on its back like a tired child crawling home. That river saved me. I'd sit by the window every morning, a chipped mug of tea in my hand, and watch the water slide past like it knew how to carry away secrets. At first, I couldn't step outside. The thought of faces, of voices, of being seen, it made my ribs ache all over again. But after a while, the quiet started to itch. I needed air. I needed something that didn't smell like memory. So I started walking just to the corner at first, then to the park 2 blocks down. Eden Park, they called it. Funny name, I thought. A place named for paradise, full of people trying to forget they'd ever tasted the apple. That's where I met Ruthie. She sold sesame candy from a wooden cart with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Ruthie's Sweet Things, since 1958. She had skin like dark velvet and a laugh that made the pigeons scatter. I must have passed her cart 10 times before she spoke. "You walk like you're holding a house on your shoulders," she said one morning, not unkindly. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, baby," she grinned. "That's grief. I know the shape of it." I didn't answer. She handed me a square of brittle candy. "First one's free. Everything that heals starts a little sweet." I took it, ate it on the bench across from her cart. It cracked and melted on my tongue, just like she said. A moment later, I found myself crying. Not the kind of sobs you can hide behind a napkin, the ugly kind. Shoulders shaking, breath caught, eyes red and raw. I covered my face, ashamed. Then I felt arms around me. She had crossed the sidewalk and sat beside me, arms warm and firm, pressing me into the kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. "You're okay," she whispered. "Ain't nothing wrong with crying. Better out than in." I hadn't been touched in months, not gently, not kindly. That embrace cracked something open. I cried for the bruises, for the babies, for the wedding dress boxed away in a closet I'd never open again. I cried for Mama, who wasn't there to brush my hair, for Claire, who carried so much worry in her eyes, and I cried for Charles, not for the man he became, but for the boy I thought I married, who never really existed. Ruthie didn't rush me. She didn't ask questions. She just held me until the sobs became hiccups, and the hiccups became silence, and the silence became breathing again. "You ready to tell it?" she asked, still holding my hand. I looked at her, a stranger, a vendor, a woman who had likely buried her own ghosts, and for the first time in my life, I said yes. I told her everything. Not with shame, not in fragments, But all of it, the sweet beginning, the slow rot, the nights on the floor, the betrayal, the blood, the final breath, and the silence that came after. I told her about Marilyn, about the article, about the names people called me when they thought I wasn't listening. She didn't flinch. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "You're not a widow," she said. "You're a witness." I stared at her. To what? To your own damn story. Something in me shifted then, like the river changed direction. I had been drowning in memory for so long that I forgot I could swim, that I could name what had happened to me, that I didn't owe anyone silence. From that day forward, I returned to the park every Thursday. I'd bring Ruthie a lemon square from the bakery below our apartment, and she'd trade it for a piece of sesame brittle and a seat by her cart. Some days we'd talk, some days we wouldn't. But she never let me carry that house on my shoulders alone again. And every night, when the river glowed silver under the moonlight, I'd sit by the window and whisper, "You can let it go now, Elle. You can tell it true. You don't have to carry their ghosts anymore." By 1979, the river had taught me how to breathe again. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I had begun to rebuild myself, not with grand declarations or dramatic new beginnings, but with small, stubborn rituals. Walking to the park before sunrise, wiping down my windowsills on Saturdays, humming hymns under my breath when I ironed my skirts. I wasn't a teacher in any official sense anymore, but somehow, children kept finding me. It started with Millie, a gap-toothed girl who sold buttons outside the fish market. She'd bring me notes scrawled on paper sacks, questions about spelling, doodles shaped like crooked birds. Then came Mateo, who read better in Spanish than in English, but couldn't tell his sevens from his nines. By the fall, I was teaching 5 children on a bench in the park every Tuesday and Thursday. They sat cross-legged with chipped pencils and second-hand notebooks, and they called me Miss E. I didn't charge them, I didn't advertise, but word spread the way truth does quiet, certain, unshakable. It was a Tuesday when she showed up. I was halfway through a story about Harriet Tubman when a shadow fell across my lap. I looked up, squinting against the sun. There she was, Nancy Whitman, Charles's older sister. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade, not since the wedding. She looked older, of course her hair thinner, her eyes wearier, but there was no mistaking her. She held the hand of a small boy, no more than 4, who stood behind her with wide brown eyes and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. I froze. She spoke first. "Eleanor." I nodded, slow and guarded. "Nancy." I didn't know where else to go. I stood, stepping between her and the children. "This isn't a good time." "I know. But please, just a moment." I dismissed the children gently, promising them jelly beans if they returned Thursday with their homework done. When they scattered, giggling and barefoot, I turned back to Nancy. She gestured toward the boy. "His name is Lucas. He's Charles's son." "And Marilyn's." I didn't speak, couldn't. The name Charles still tasted like rust in my mouth. "I've had him since he was a baby," she continued. "The state placed him with me after everything. But I'm sick now, Elle, real sick. And the doctors say I don't have long." Still, I said nothing. Her voice cracked. "They want to take him. Put him in a group home. He doesn't have anybody. Except you." I finally looked at him. He had Charles's eyes, that same amber brown with flecks of gold, the same unruly dark hair, the same crooked smile when he caught me watching him. But his fingers twisted nervously in the hem of his shirt. His shoes were too big. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just waited. Nancy knelt beside him, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Say hello, baby." The boy looked up at me. "Hi," he said softly. Something broke inside me. I saw myself 8 years old, standing outside the Harmony post office in a too-big coat, waiting for a mother who'd gone in and never came back. I remembered what it felt like to be passed over, to be almost loved, to be the reminder no one wanted. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't look at him and see his father." Nancy's eyes filled. "He's not Charles." But the resemblance was so strong it felt like a punch. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "Here's everything: his paperwork, his doctor's file, his placement forms. I've already told social services you're the next of kin. It's up to you now." "Why would they let me raise him?" I asked, my voice brittle. "Because you're the only one left who hasn't failed him yet." And with that she stood. She didn't beg, didn't linger. She kissed Lucas one last time, placed the envelope on the bench, and walked away. Lucas stared at me. I knelt in front of him. "Do you want to come sit by the river with me?" He nodded. We walked in silence. I offered him half a sandwich from my bag, and he devoured it like he hadn't eaten all day. I asked him what he liked. He shrugged. I asked him if he had a favorite color. "Blue," he said. I asked him if anyone had ever taught him the alphabet. "Kinda," he mumbled, around a bite of bread. Then I asked him the question I was most afraid of. "Do you know who your father was?" He shook his head. "I just know he died before I was born." I exhaled. That night, I sat at my window and stared at the Ohio River. Lucas lay asleep on the little cot we'd borrowed from the neighbor downstairs. His feet poked out from under the quilt. His breath was steady, trusting. I wept quietly. I wept because I didn't want this. I wept because maybe I did. I wept because I knew I could walk him to the door of a foster home and hand him off to strangers who'd never see his eyes as a mirror of pain. I could pretend he wasn't mine to care for. I could live a quieter life, but I also knew that doing so would mean repeating what had been done to me, leaving the unwanted behind, and I couldn't do that, not again. So the next morning, I signed every line in that envelope. I filed every paper, called every office, bought him socks that fit, and a toothbrush shaped like a dinosaur. I cooked oatmeal with cinnamon. I taught him to read his name. I chose him. Even with the shadows, even with the memories, even with the face that haunted me. I chose him. Because healing is never clean, never linear. But sometimes, it begins with choosing someone you don't have to, and realizing that, in doing so, you're choosing the broken parts of yourself too. By 1982, the papers were finalized. Lucas was no longer my late husband's son, not in the eyes of the law. He was mine, mine to raise, mine to protect. Mine to love even when it hurt, even when it reminded me of everything that came before. He started calling me Mama one night while brushing his teeth. It was casual, almost careless, like he'd been saying it for years. But I froze in the hallway, hand still resting on the light switch, as that word settled into the air like a blessing. It scared me how much I needed to hear it. It scared me even more how quickly I answered, "Yes, sweetheart?" Cincinnati had become home in the truest sense, not just a place to hide, but a place to live again. I continued my small group teaching in the park until one of the local churches offered me a room in the basement for free. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd haul books and chalkboards down the stairs while Lucas played with plastic dinosaurs on the carpet nearby. The church ladies brought me tea and gently nudged me toward the single men at Sunday service, but I always smiled and shook my head. That is, until I met Tom Anderson. Tom was a math teacher at the public middle school just up the road. He started dropping by the church on his lunch breaks to bring extra supplies, binders, protractors, an old set of encyclopedias. He had a slow, careful way of speaking, like he wanted to make sure every word landed gently. His shirts were always neatly tucked, his glasses perpetually sliding down the bridge of his nose. He never asked about my past. He never pitied me. He asked about Lucas's spelling tests, about my favorite books, about whether I preferred strawberry jam or apricot on toast. I didn't know how to trust that kind of kindness. I kept waiting for the catch, but it never came. Lucas liked him immediately. Said Tom reminded him of the patient bus driver who let him pull the horn cord twice. "He doesn't talk too much," Lucas whispered once, "but he listens." That spring, Tom invited us to the county fair. He held my hand as we watched Lucas win a stuffed frog at the ring toss booth. He told me I looked beautiful in blue, and when he kissed me goodnight on the cheek, I didn't flinch. Months passed, quietly, sweetly. Then came Lily. I hadn't planned on falling in love again, let alone getting pregnant. The doctors had told me that after everything, the bruising, the damage, I might never carry a child again. I had accepted it, tucked that grief into a corner of my ribcage and moved on. But life, it seems, has a way of blooming in the most unexpected places. I found out on a rainy Thursday morning after vomiting behind the church before class. I blamed it on a bad egg salad sandwich. Ruthie laughed when I told her, "Baby, you've got that glow. That ain't no sandwich." The test confirmed it. Then the doctor confirmed it again. I was 30 years old, exhausted, terrified, and pregnant. Tom knelt when I told him, not to propose, just to hold me. He pressed his ear to my belly, like he could hear the future kicking its way into the world. Lily was born in May 1985. All 10 fingers, all 10 toes, a cry like wind chimes in a summer storm. She looked nothing like Charles, nothing like the pain. She was all softness, all newness, all possibility. Lucas was 7 then. He held her in his arms like she was made of porcelain and whispered, "Hi, I'm your big brother." He had waited so long to belong to something. Now he did, but the past, as it does, lingered. One evening, as we folded laundry in the living room, Lucas looked up and asked, "Mama, who was my real dad?" I froze mid-fold. I had rehearsed this conversation 100 different ways, but in that moment, all I could do was kneel beside him and say, "You don't have just one real dad. You have every person who chooses to stay. You have Tom, and you have me. That's what real means." He nodded, solemn and quiet, then asked, "Did my first dad hurt you?" I didn't lie. "Yes." "Do you still hurt?" I swallowed. "Not in the same way." He reached for my hand. "Okay, I'm glad you picked me." Later that night, I watched him sit on the floor with Lily, stacking wooden blocks and making her giggle until her chubby cheeks turned pink. He gave her the taller towers, let her win the race to the fridge, taught her how to whistle before she could spell her name. And that's when I said it, not to anyone in particular, just to the air, to God, to the ghosts that no longer haunted our hallways. "We stopped it," I whispered. "We stopped the past from repeating." Because we had. In our tiny kitchen, with mismatched plates and a radio that only played 2 stations, we had rewritten the story. Lucas would never be called unwanted. Lily would never cower at a man's footsteps. I would never again confuse fear for love. Ours wasn't a perfect family, but it was a different kind of motherhood, the kind born from choice, from survival, from learning how to love even when it once broke you. And that kind, I was learning, was strong enough to carry generations. By the summer of 1992, Lucas was 16, tall, quiet, and a little too smart for his own good. He had his father's eyes, but none of his father's shadow. Or so I thought. He played trumpet in the marching band, stacked library books after school for spare change, and still made Lily laugh with his spot on Elvis impersonation. Tom had taught him how to change the oil in our Buick, how to iron a dress shirt, how to look someone in the eye and shake their hand without apologizing for existing. He was becoming a man. I was proud of, a boy raised not by blood, but by kindness and choice. And then he found the envelope. I had hidden it years ago, at the back of a file drawer beneath old tax returns and faded water bills. It was sealed but not locked. A thin manila thing stamped with a quartz black ink. State of Ohio, guardianship transfer. Inside was his original birth certificate, the one with the name Lucas Whitman typed neatly beside the words, Father, Charles Whitman, and Mother, Marilyn Cooper. He didn't say anything at first. I found him sitting on the front porch after sunset, the envelope in his lap, his eyes blank, wide, unblinking. "Did you know," he whispered, "that I have his smile?" I sat beside him slowly. "You have your own smile." His jaw tightened. "You lied to me." "No," I said gently. "I waited to tell you until you could hear it." He looked at me, then not angry, but betrayed in a way that pierced deeper than yelling ever could. "Why would you keep this from me?" I paused, then spoke carefully. Because it's not just a name, Lucas. It's a wound. One I didn't want you to carry until you had muscles strong enough to bear it. He stared straight ahead. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about Charles, about the way he held open doors and whispered promises in the dark. About how love, when it turns cruel, doesn't shout, it erodes. I told him about the first slap, the bruises, the babies that never came home, the blood on the stairs, the betrayal with Marilyn, her grave beneath the field, his father's death on the highway, the silence that followed. I didn't spare the ugly parts. I didn't flinch. I told it all. When I finished, Lucas was crying. Not loud, just quietly unraveling, his shoulders hunched like the weight of history had landed all at once. So I'm the son of two people who destroyed each other, he whispered. No, I said firmly, turning to face him. You are the son of the woman who chose you, who took a breath after hell and said yes to loving you anyway. But it's in me, he said, pressing his hand to his chest, his blood. I reached out and placed my hand over his. Then we teach your blood a new story. The next few weeks were hard. Lucas didn't eat much. He stopped practicing trumpet. He avoided Lily's questions. I'd hear him pacing at night, opening and closing his closet door, as if trying to find a space where he could put what he'd learned. Grief at 16 is different. It doesn't cry itself to sleep. It punishes. It hides. It punishes again. Tom sat with him most evenings, playing chess in silence or just watching TV. He never tried to fix it. He just showed up, which in the end is the most sacred kind of love there is. One Saturday morning, Lucas came into the kitchen, still barefoot, and sat down at the table. He looked at Tom and said, "If it's okay, can I take your name?" Tom blinked, then nodded, then stood and hugged the boy with more pride than I'd ever seen in his eyes. A month later, we sat in a courthouse and watched a judge stamp the name Lucas Anderson into permanence. It was quiet, no balloons, no camera flashes, just a moment when paper caught up to truth. That night, I found Lucas in the backyard, sitting under the old oak tree. He looked up at me and said, "Do you still see him in me?" I knelt beside him, brushed the hair from his forehead like I used to when he had fevers. "No," I said softly. "I see the boy who made Lily laugh, the boy who held my hand when Mama died, the boy who waited patiently while I learned how to love again." He leaned into me, tears warm against my shoulder. "I don't want to be him." "You aren't," I whispered. "You're mine, not by accident, not by blood, by choice." And then I said the words I had waited years to give him, words that stitched something closed inside both of us. "You are not Charles's son. You are the son of the woman who stayed." He didn't answer. He just cried harder. And this time, I cried with him. Because the truth, the real truth, is never clean. It bleeds. It cracks. It leaves marks. But when spoken with love, it also heals. It rewrites the story. That night, I kissed his forehead like I had when he was 4 and scared of thunderstorms. And in the silence that followed, I knew the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned us. Lucas was no longer the boy with his father's smile. He was a young man with a future of his own. Part 9. From broken glass to a lighthouse. I used to think broken things should be hidden. That shame was a bruise you kept beneath your sleeves. That stories like mine were best buried between church pews and charity bake sales. But the older I got, the more I understood. Some things don't disappear when you bury them. They grow in the dark. So I stopped burying mine. It started with the old post office on Jefferson Street. By the early 2000s, the building had been abandoned for over a decade, windows boarded, bricks cracked, roof sagging like tired shoulders. I walked past it every Sunday on my way to the market, and every time, something in me whispered, that could be a school. That could be hope. Tom and I put up a sign handwritten, nothing fancy, Community Learning Center, volunteers wanted, and waited. By the end of the first week, 12 people had signed up. By the second month, We had 50 folding chairs and a chalkboard bolted to the wall. We opened our doors for free literacy classes every Wednesday night. Mothers came with babies on their hips. Grandfathers came with calloused hands and trembling pens. No one left feeling small. We built a library from donated paperbacks, mismatched shelves, and a few computer monitors Tom scrounged from the school district. We called it the Lighthouse because sometimes all people need is a sliver of light in the fog. I was 48 when the diagnosis came: breast cancer. I remember sitting on the vinyl exam table, the air thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic, while the doctor spoke words that rang like gunshots. Stage 2, chemotherapy, lumpectomy, radiation. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. Not this time, because pain no longer had power over me. Not after Charles, not after Marilyn, not after burying my father and surviving the ghosts he never spoke of. This was a different kind of war, but I had already lived through the worst kind of silence, and silence, I knew, was deadlier than disease. Lucas flew home from Atlanta the next day. He was an architect now, tall and kind, always smelling faintly of cedar and clean blueprints. He brought blue hydrangeas and a folder of research. "We've got this, Mom," he said, "one floor plan at a time." Lily took a leave of absence from med school, slept in the chair beside my bed, braided my thinning hair, and read poetry out loud while the chemo dripped slow and silent into my veins. I got better. It took 2 years surgery, radiation, months of nausea and dreams I no longer remember, but I got better. And when I did, I went back to the Lighthouse. We added evening computer classes, GED prep, parenting workshops. Saturday, yoga in the basement. And when the pandemic hit and the world shrank into living rooms and screen boxes, I taught English over Zoom from the kitchen table, my Bible and a cup of tea always within reach. I watched faces flicker across the screen, mothers in bathrobes, teenagers in bunk beds, elders hunched over borrowed tablets, and I reminded them that learning was never shameful, that it was never too late to begin again. One morning, I ended class and turned to find Lucas in the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, watching me like he had something on his chest. "You ever think about telling your story, Mom?" he asked. I blinked. "I tell it every day." "No," he said gently. "I mean all of it. Your story. The pain. The survival. The lighthouse." I laughed. "And who would want to hear that?" He set his mug down and walked toward me. "Someone who thinks they're alone. Someone who's still living inside the silence you fought your way out of." I didn't know what to say. He pulled out his phone and opened the YouTube app. "Mom, maybe your pain can help someone else survive theirs." That sentence stayed with me for days. It echoed while I watered the garden, while I folded laundry, while I brushed Lily's childhood artwork from the back of the closet. I had spent so long believing that survival meant moving on, staying quiet, letting the world think I'd been untouched. But maybe survival also meant speaking, so that others would know they weren't the only ones. And maybe, just maybe, I hadn't survived for myself alone. I never planned to be seen by the world. At 73, I thought my story had already been told in quiet ways. In the way Lily kissed her children's foreheads like prayers, in the way Lucas still called me every Sunday before church, in the warmth of my kitchen when the oven was full of cornbread and the air smelled like rosemary and memory. I had my little home near the Ohio River, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a porch swing that creaked when the wind got sentimental. That, I thought, was enough. But one upload changed everything. It wasn't slick or polished, just a simple video, my face in soft afternoon light, sitting in my old armchair, my voice steady, maybe a little worn. Lucas had set it up with a tripod and a laptop. Lily added subtitles. I told the story not like I was being interviewed, but like I was reaching out to someone in the dark, the kind of someone I used to be. I didn't think people would listen, but they did. First 1,000 views, then 10,000, then hundreds of thousands. People from places I'd never seen wrote comments like prayers. I needed this. This saved me. I didn't know someone else had lived my pain. By the time it passed 1 million views, the local news came knocking, then a radio show. Then a short segment on national television. Eleanor Bennett, survivor, teacher, grandmother, and the voice behind the viral video, How I Chose Love. They asked if I wanted to write a book. I said no. I'd rather teach a class. They asked if I'd consider speaking engagements. I said maybe if they served lemon bars. But what meant the most weren't the cameras or the interviews. It was the letters, hundreds of them. From women who'd fled in the night with nothing but their babies. From men who'd never told anyone they were hurt too. From teenagers who had grown up thinking love always meant pain. They thanked me, but more than that, they believed me. And in their belief, something inside me healed not the scar, but the silence. At the community center now named the Bennett Lighthouse, though I protested the name, a teenager once stopped me in the hallway. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "You're the grandma who teaches people how to survive, right?" And I smiled. Because I was no longer the widow of a murderer, no longer the woman who once bled in silence on a kitchen floor. I had become, somehow, through the alchemy of truth, the grandmother who taught survival like a language. Lucas is 44 now. He's designing public libraries across the Midwest. Lily just turned 40 and runs a free clinic in Columbus with her wife and 3 daughters, my grandbabies, wild and loud and perfect in ways I never dreamed a child's life could be. They visit often. The girls help me bake, pick tomatoes, braid my hair with too many barrettes. The youngest once asked if I had always been this wrinkled. I told her, "No, sweet pea. These lines used to be smooth, but then I lived." And oh, how I lived. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch with a mug of warm milk and a blanket tucked around my knees. The river shimmered in the moonlight, same as it always had. The world was quieter than usual. My hands rested in my lap. I looked at them. These hands had held babies, held grudges, held the weight of truth. These hands had written lesson plans, scrubbed blood from tile, carried boxes down apartment stairs at midnight. These hands had been struck, and they had struck back not with fists, but with chalk, with soup, with the soft strength of staying when it would have been easier to disappear. I ran my fingers along the ridge of my knuckles, traced the places where time had carved valleys and ridges. The veins rose like rivers on a map, and I thought, these hands, these old, tired, beautiful hands, are the only evidence I need that I made it. And if my story reached even one more soul lost in the fog, then it was worth every tremble it took to speak it. So let me say it now, clearly, for whoever's listening at the edge of their own silence. I am